In a quiet corner of the world, a group of scientists and engineers sat around a table, faces lit by the glow of computer screens. They were a small team, some barely out of university, others with years of experience. They weren't just dreaming, they were determined to make the impossible happen. Their goal? To send humans into space. Most people thought it was crazy. Many said it couldn't be done. The world had already seen countless failed attempts. There were governments with billions of dollars, and still, the stars seemed so far away. Yet, in this room, there was no doubt. The dream started with one message that echoed in their minds: the impossible is only the beginning. It wasn't just a slogan, it was their mantra, their reason to keep pushing when the world seemed against them. As the team gathered their resources, they knew they were up against more than just technology. They were battling a system that didn't believe in their dream. Funding was low, and support was almost non-existent. The skeptics were everywhere, telling them that space travel was far too dangerous, too costly, and simply out of reach for humans like them. But they wouldn't back down. They had one thing the others didn't: the belief that humanity was capable of achieving anything, even the impossible. Their research and development were slow, but each small step forward felt like a victory. With every failure, they learned. With every setback, they grew stronger. One night, as the team gathered to review their latest progress, the room fell silent. A breakthrough had just occurred. A small, quiet achievement in their testing had unlocked a new path forward. It wasn't much, just a few tweaks in the propulsion system, but it was enough to spark a flame of hope. Maybe they were closer than anyone had realized. It wasn't just a technological challenge anymore. It was about proving to the world that humans could reach beyond their limits. As they looked out at the stars, they didn't just see distant lights. They saw possibilities, the future of humanity, and a chance to write their names into history. This wasn't just science, it was the start of something bigger. The dream of space was always considered unreachable, something only the biggest nations could ever attempt. But these scientists weren't waiting for a government to step in or for the world to believe. They were doing it themselves. They knew it was dangerous, and they knew it might fail. But they also knew that the only way to know what was possible was to push as far as they could, even if the stars seemed too far to touch. With each passing day, they worked tirelessly, pouring every ounce of their knowledge, energy, and passion into the mission. They worked with a singular focus, driven by the belief that humanity could overcome any challenge, no matter how great. Their project wasn't just about technology, it was about proving to the world that the impossible was only a matter of perspective. As the team prepared for the first test flight of their spacecraft, the air was thick with anticipation. The dream that had seemed so far away was now within reach. But even as they stood on the edge of this monumental moment, there were still whispers of doubt. Would it really work? Would they succeed where so many others had failed? But it didn't matter. They were going to try. And that, in itself, was the most important thing of all. The countdown had begun. The dream was no longer just a dream. It was a reality, and they were about to make history. The stars were waiting. The countdown was over. The spacecraft was ready, and the team had done everything in their power to make it work. But there was a lingering feeling in the air, an uncertainty that no amount of preparation could shake. They were about to take the biggest leap of their lives, and no one knew what would happen next. The dream they had worked toward for so long was now within reach. But the risks were greater than ever. As the launch day approached, the pressure mounted. Everyone had their eyes on the project, and there was no turning back. The whole world was waiting to see if they could make the impossible possible. Would the spacecraft soar into the sky as planned, or would it crash before it even had a chance to leave the Earth's atmosphere? The team worked around the clock, double-checking every component, every wire, every calculation. There could be no mistakes. The spacecraft had to work, or everything they had worked for would be lost. Every test had shown promise, but those tests were no guarantee of success. They had pushed their technology to the limit, but the truth was that no one really knew if it was enough. And then, disaster struck. It happened during a routine test of the spacecraft's fuel systems. There was a sudden explosion, loud and terrifying, that echoed across the lab. The shockwave rattled the building, and a rush of panic filled the air. The team rushed to the control room, hearts racing, unsure of what they would find. The screen showed a catastrophic failure. The spacecraft, still sitting in the hangar, had sustained massive damage. The fuel lines had ruptured, and critical systems were offline. It wasn't just a setback, it was a nightmare. The mission, the dream that had consumed their lives for so long, seemed to be over before it had even truly begun. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of the failure pressing down on everyone. For a moment, it seemed like the world had collapsed around them. But the team wasn't ready to give up, not yet. They had come too far, fought too hard, to let one failure define them. The dream wasn't dead. It was just a challenge they hadn't anticipated. In the days that followed, the team scrambled to assess the damage. The clock was ticking, and the pressure from the outside world was growing. They couldn't afford to fail again. The skeptics, the ones who had said this mission was impossible, were watching. The stakes had never been higher. With each passing hour, the team worked tirelessly to repair the spacecraft. They worked long into the night, their hands trembling with exhaustion but their resolve stronger than ever. They weren't just fixing a broken machine, they were fighting for their dream, fighting for the future of humanity. The repairs were painstaking. It wasn't just about fixing a broken system, it was about rebuilding the hope that had been shattered. Every small success felt like a victory, but the team knew that time was running out. They needed to get the spacecraft back on track, and fast. In the midst of the chaos, something extraordinary happened. The team came together like never before. Each person, no matter their role, put everything aside to work as one. The engineers, the scientists, the technicians, they all shared a single goal, to make this mission succeed. And as the repairs were completed, something shifted in the air. It wasn't just a spacecraft they were working on anymore. It was a symbol of hope, a beacon of possibility for the future. As the spacecraft was slowly rolled out of the hangar once more, there was a feeling of something bigger happening. The damage had been repaired, but the journey ahead was still uncertain. There were no guarantees, but the team's spirit had been reignited. They were ready to face whatever came next. The world watched in anticipation. Would the spacecraft fly? Would humanity's dream of space travel finally come true? The team didn't know, but they knew one thing for sure, they weren't going to stop trying. The impossible was still out there, and they were determined to reach it. The countdown resumed. The mission wasn't over, it had just begun. The day had come. After endless days of hard work, sleepless nights, and countless setbacks, the spacecraft was finally ready for launch. The world had watched as the team fought against every possible obstacle. Some had doubted them, others had laughed at their ambition, but now it was time to prove everyone wrong. The spacecraft stood tall, its engines humming softly in the background, ready to carry humanity beyond the edge of what was once thought possible. As the launch sequence began, the air around the launch pad crackled with tension. The team stood behind the glass wall, faces pressed against the windows, holding their breath. It felt like the entire world was holding its breath with them. Everything had been meticulously planned, every system checked, every detail ironed out. This was their moment, their chance to show the world that humanity could defy the odds and reach for the stars. The countdown ticked down. 10, 9, 8. With each passing second, the anticipation grew. But deep down, the team knew this wasn't just about technology. This was about human spirit. This was about proving that even against the toughest of challenges, nothing could stand in the way of their dreams. Then, at 0, the rocket engines ignited with a roar. The ground shook as the spacecraft slowly began to lift off, rising from the launch pad, its engines firing with immense power. The roar of the engines drowned out everything else, the sound reverberating through the very air. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The spacecraft rose, higher and higher, cutting through the atmosphere, breaking free from the grip of Earth. But then, something unexpected happened. The ship shuddered violently, a loud bang echoing through the control room. Panic spread like wildfire as the spacecraft's systems began to flicker. A warning light flashed red on the control screens. A critical system had malfunctioned. The ship was losing altitude. The dream, it seemed, was on the verge of collapse. In the control room, the tension was unbearable. The engineers scrambled to assess the situation, fingers flying across the keyboards, trying to regain control. The spacecraft was still climbing, but the malfunction threatened to bring it all to a devastating halt. Outside, the world held its collective breath, wondering if the dream would slip away once again. But the team refused to give up. They had come too far to fail now. Every person in the room knew that this was the moment that would define them. They had faced failure before and survived, and now they would face it again, head-on. The engineers worked furiously, recalibrating the systems, bypassing the damaged components, and reprogramming the spacecraft's emergency protocols. The minutes felt like hours. In those tense moments, the team held on to one thought: they couldn't let the dream die. Not today. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the systems began to stabilize. The warning lights flickered off, replaced by steady green indicators. The spacecraft, though shaken, was still climbing. The launch was far from smooth, but the team had done it. They had overcome the malfunction, and the spacecraft was now on course, heading toward space. The control room erupted into cheers. Relief, mixed with disbelief, flooded the team. They had done it. Against all odds, they had managed to keep the spacecraft airborne, and now there was no turning back. The impossible had been defied, but the journey was far from over. They were just getting started. As the spacecraft continued its journey into space, the team gathered around the screens, watching in awe as their creation disappeared into the blackness above. The spacecraft had broken free of Earth's grasp, leaving behind the world that had once doubted it. Humanity's first true step into the stars was now a reality. But even as they celebrated, they knew that this was only the beginning. The challenges ahead were even greater. Space was unforgiving, and there were dangers they couldn't even begin to imagine. But one thing was certain: the team had proved that humanity could reach beyond its limitations. They had faced failure, faced fear, and yet they had broken through. The dream wasn't just alive, it was soaring. The spacecraft was in space, and humanity had officially broken the boundaries that had once confined them. They had reached for the stars, and the stars had responded. Now, the team would show the world just what humanity was capable of achieving. The impossible had become reality, and the universe would never be the same again. The journey was far from over. As the spacecraft continued its journey beyond Earth's atmosphere, the crew settled into the rhythm of space. They had broken free of the planet, but they were now entering a new, uncharted realm. The crew members, still adjusting to the vast silence of space, knew that the true test was only just beginning. The stakes were higher now, the unknown loomed ahead, and they would need all their courage, skill, and resolve to navigate it. The vastness of space was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The crew had trained for this moment, prepared for every possible scenario. But now that they were here, in the cold, dark void, the scale of what they had accomplished, and the dangers ahead, began to sink in. For days, the team followed their trajectory, monitoring their spacecraft systems, and staying vigilant for any signs of malfunction. The Earth was now a distant memory, a tiny blue dot in the distance, reminding them of everything they had left behind. The noise and chaos of the world were gone, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the hum of the spacecraft's engines. They were alone, with only the stars and their mission to guide them. But even as they marveled at the beauty of the universe, doubt started to creep in. They were venturing deeper into the unknown, and there were dangers they couldn't yet understand. The systems that had once been their lifeline now seemed fragile. The further they pushed, the more vulnerable they became. They had crossed into a space where no human had gone before. Every small malfunction, every unexpected movement, felt like a potential disaster waiting to happen. As they passed the edge of Earth's orbit, the first major obstacle loomed on the horizon. The ship's sensors detected an anomaly, a strange, unexplained energy reading that seemed to be coming from deep in space. It wasn't much at first, just a flicker on the radar. But as the crew studied the data, the readings became clearer, stronger. It was as though something was out there, something waiting to be discovered. The crew had no idea what it could be. The readings didn't match anything in their existing databases, and their mission had not accounted for any encounters with unknown phenomena. But they had no choice. The mission was about exploration, and they were ready to face whatever this anomaly was. Slowly, cautiously, they altered their course, moving toward the source of the strange signal. As the spacecraft drew closer, the anomaly became more distinct. It wasn't just a reading, it was a presence, something real and undeniable. The crew exchanged nervous glances. What had they just stumbled upon? Their training had prepared them for space travel, for navigating the unknown, but nothing had prepared them for this. The closer they got, the more intense the signals became. There was no mistaking it now, something, or someone, was out there. A strange, mysterious energy pulsed in the void, its source just ahead. It was a discovery no one had predicted, a moment that would change everything. The spacecraft's sensors began to pick up faint, rhythmic pulses of energy, unlike anything they had ever encountered. It wasn't like the natural cosmic radiation they had studied in simulations. This was something deliberate, something purposeful. Someone, or something, was trying to communicate. The crew could feel it. This was a message, an invitation, or perhaps a warning. For a long moment, the crew was silent. The enormity of their discovery hung in the air. This wasn't just a scientific anomaly, it was something far more significant. They had just uncovered evidence that they were not alone in the universe. And with this discovery came a terrifying realization: whatever lay ahead, they were no longer explorers. They were intruders. The crew was split between excitement and fear. The signal was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. They had crossed into a realm where their knowledge didn't apply, and the rules of the universe were unknown. They had come to space to prove that humanity could defy the odds, but now they were faced with a new, far more complex challenge. The implications of this discovery would change everything they had known about the universe, and their place in it. As they prepared to investigate further, the crew couldn't shake the feeling that they had just set something into motion, something they might not be able to stop. The dream of space exploration had turned into a dangerous reality, and the unknown forces they had discovered were far more powerful than they could have ever imagined. They had broken free of Earth's boundaries, but now they were on the brink of something far greater, something that would test the very limits of human courage. The new era they had hoped for was here. And it was far more perilous than they had ever imagined. The discovery had changed everything. The crew of the spacecraft had expected challenges. They had prepared for technical failures, dangerous anomalies, and the vast emptiness of space itself. But what they encountered was beyond anything they could have imagined. They were no longer just explorers, they were witnesses to something monumental, a message from an unknown source, pulsing through the void. The universe had suddenly become far more complex and dangerous than they had ever realized. As the spacecraft moved closer to the signal, the crew found themselves caught in a mix of awe and fear. What had they uncovered? What awaited them at the heart of the anomaly? There were no answers, only questions that pushed them further into the unknown. With each passing second, the crew felt the weight of their decision to pursue the signal. They had come to explore, but now they were standing on the edge of a discovery that could change everything humanity had ever known about the universe. The closer they got to the source, the more intense the energy became. The spacecraft's systems began to react in strange ways. It was as if the very fabric of space around them was being altered, warped by the presence of something ancient and powerful. The crew scrambled to maintain control, running diagnostic tests and recalibrating systems, but the sensation of unease was palpable. The unknown force ahead seemed to be playing with their ship, testing their resolve. "Should we turn back?" one of the engineers asked, voice shaking. The question hung in the air, unanswered. No one dared to suggest retreat, not after everything they had gone through to reach this point. They had fought too hard, bled too much, to turn back now. "Keep going," the mission commander ordered, his voice steady. "We're too close to stop." The spacecraft moved forward, pushed by an invisible force, until they found themselves at the very heart of the anomaly. What they saw next was something no human had ever seen before. In the vastness of space, a massive structure loomed, floating in silence, its surface gleaming with an eerie, otherworldly glow. It was unlike anything they had ever encountered, an alien artifact, a relic of a civilization far more advanced than anything humanity could comprehend. For a long moment, the crew was frozen, staring at the monument that floated before them. It was massive, spanning miles in length, with intricate patterns etched into its surface. The ship's sensors struggled to make sense of the data. There were no known materials or technologies that matched what they were seeing. The structure seemed to defy the laws of physics, existing outside of their understanding of the universe. This is real," the commander whispered. "We are standing on the edge of history." It wasn't just a structure, it was a gateway, a door to a universe far beyond their comprehension. The spacecraft's sensors began picking up strange pulses of energy emanating from the artifact. It wasn't just a discovery, it was an invitation, a message to those brave enough to seek it out. The crew was not alone. They never had been. The team took a collective breath, their minds racing with questions and possibilities. Could this alien artifact be the key to understanding the universe's deepest mysteries? Could it unlock the potential for humanity to achieve greatness beyond their wildest dreams? Or was it a warning, a harbinger of something far more dangerous lurking beyond the stars? There was no time for second-guessing. They had come this far, and they had to press forward. With trembling hands, the commander activated the ship's systems to begin scanning the structure. The readings were incomprehensible at first, a whirlwind of data that made no sense. But then, slowly, patterns began to emerge, revealing faint images and symbols that seemed to be carved into the surface of the artifact. The crew leaned in, studying the data. What they saw next would change everything. The symbols, when translated, told a story of a race that had once ruled the stars, only to vanish without a trace. Their civilization had been lost to time, their knowledge and technology fading into obscurity. But now, they had left behind a message for the ones who came after them. The message was simple, yet profound: we are not alone. We never were. The message echoed through the spacecraft's communication system, reverberating in the minds of the crew. They had uncovered the truth, they were not the first to reach for the stars. There had been others before them, far older and far wiser. And this artifact, this discovery, was proof of it. But with that knowledge came a new, terrifying truth: the universe was far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. The artifact was not just a relic of the past, it was a warning, a reminder that humanity was still a fledgling species in a universe full of ancient, powerful forces. The dream of space exploration had just become a nightmare. The stakes were higher than ever before. Humanity had reached for the stars, but now they had to face the consequences of what they had uncovered. The universe was vast, and not all of it was friendly. The crew had survived the impossible, but what lay ahead would test them like nothing before. And so, the journey continued. They had achieved the impossible, but now they had to survive the unknown.